Tonight on Primetime Politics, taking no comfort.
I am more alarmed today than I was yesterday after having read the report.
The NDP leader gets access to the unredacted report for NSICOP. Jagmeet Singh saying he is now more convinced that a number of MPs knowingly provided help to foreign governments, some to the detriment of Canada and Canadians. It is the exact opposite of what we heard earlier this week from the Green Party leader. We'll speak to our strategist panel about this glaring disconnect. And the G7 countries agree to extend a $50 billion loan to Ukraine. But what else are the world's major democratic industrialized countries hoping to achieve at their meeting in Italy? We'll get some insight. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Jagmeet Singh became the second opposition leader to read the unredacted report from NSICOP today. But unlike the Green Party's Elizabeth May, the NDP leader says he is more alarmed now than before. And unlike Elizabeth May, he sees behavior that has worked against the interests of Canada.
But after having read the report, I am more convinced than ever of the conclusions of the NSICOP committee and the report, that some parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. That all of these behaviors of these MPs are deeply unethical and contrary to the oaths and affirmations parliamentarians take to conduct themselves in the best interests of Canada. In short, there are a number of MPs who have knowingly provided help to foreign governments, some to the detriment of Canada and Canadians. There are also politicians at all levels of government who have benefited from foreign interference. Some of this behavior absolutely appears to be criminal and should be prosecuted.
So that was the NDP leader in front of the House of Commons earlier today. And to talk about this, we're now joined by our weekly strategy panel. Susan Smith is the co-founder and principal of Blue Sky Strategy Group. Jordan Paquet is a senior consultant with that same firm. And Anne McGrath is the principal secretary to the NDP leader. Hello to the three of you.
Hello. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Michael.
So, we have to start with Jagmeet Singh because clearly what he has stated here today is very different than what we heard from Elizabeth May the other day, because Elizabeth May, when she saw the unredacted report, she said that it did not list any current MP as wittingly helping foreign states, and what it does list falls short of what could be considered as being disloyal to Canada. So why the disconnect, do you think?
I think Mr. Singh is picking and choosing what he wants to lean on when it comes to a news conference. He had a feisty news conference. He's going to get headlines today out of this. It seems that his party is in the clear. He was asked if he would expel any MPs from his party. He's leaned hard on Mr. Paquet, but I think he's just picking and choosing what he can lean on. Elizabeth May said there is no list in the unredacted version, yet the redacted version claims there is something to this effect. It's a bit confusing to me, but the thing that struck me the most actually was how hard he leaned on Mr. Paquet and the fact that he has not taken the responsibility to get the security clearance to review it, and that there's clearly been foreign interference in two Conservative leadership campaigns. We don't know if one of them was his. So there's a bit of dodgeball going on there with Mr. Paquet, and I was surprised at how terse Mr. Singh is. It's not his usual tone.
Mm-hmm. And we will talk about getting access to it a little bit later on. But, Jordan, and important to note, of course, we've not seen the unredacted version, so we're talking a bit in the dark here. But when you listen to Elizabeth May and you listen to the NDP leader, what do you think of that disconnect?
Well, it's like they read two completely different reports. And I think if the other party leaders read the reports as well and came out, you'd probably get three other different versions of what was contained in it. I think, to Susan's point, I think there is some picking and choosing about what's important, what people actually want to focus on within it, which just goes to the overall process and how important it is to get these proper documents through the judicial inquiry that's currently happening. And that's why it was important that the opposition parties really forced this from the beginning when the government wasn't taking it seriously. So I think there is a process in place. I think it's important to continue through that. I think, if RCMP, CSIS did see glaring issues in certain leadership races, they would have approached the parties. To my knowledge, from people I talked to, they haven't. So I guess, we'll see what happens from here.
Mm-hmm. Anne, what do you make of this?
Well, I listened to both of the news conferences, obviously, and what struck me, and you're right, like I have not read the unredacted report, but I did read the redacted report, and when I heard Ms. May's news conference yesterday, it sounded a little bit like the unredacted report was completely different than the redacted report, which makes no sense at all. I mean, if the redacted report, the one that's public that everybody can read, says that, Mr. Singh was actually quoting from it there, witting and unwitting, participants in this, in our parliament, that we have parliamentarians who are participating in this, and they know that that's what they're doing. So we already know that. And you can know that without reading the unredacted report. So I'm not surprised, really, by what he had to say about that.
Yeah, well, and clearly, for Elizabeth May to say that she's relieved, and then to hear the Jagmeet Singh say that he is more alarmed now, it does lead to a lot of head scratching. Although the fact is that Elizabeth May has seen the unredacted report because she's gone to get the security clearance to have it. Jagmeet Singh has read the unredacted report because he's gone through the process of getting the security clearance to do it. But Pierre Poilievre is still refusing to do so. So what is the impact of his refusal? Can he really be a critic of this process without getting access, as all the other leaders are now doing?
No, I don't think he can. And I think the longer he goes without getting the security clearance for this particular issue, the more it's going to hurt him. He looks like he's being irresponsible. He looks like, as Mr. Singh said, he's putting party before country. And no member of parliament should put party before country, and no leader should put party before country. And I think it's the responsibility of all of the leaders to get their clearance so that they can make sure that their parties are clean, clear, and the people who are sitting with them in caucus are clean and clear. So I think Mr. Poilievre is digging in so he can feign. There's some stuff he doesn't want to see, clearly, and he can say, well, I haven't seen it, so he can chirp on about it. But I think sooner or later the pressure's going to be on him to have a good look at it. I don't know whether he'll succumb. He's a bit stubborn in this particular case. But the longer he goes, the less responsible he looks and the less leader-like he looks.
Jordan?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I mean, it was the Conservatives that initially pushed for some of this process. And we have to remember that. The government really just tried to sweep it under the rug from day one. So Jagmeet Singh's predecessor, Tom Mulcair, came out this afternoon and said if he was opposition leader, he wouldn't get the briefing because it's going to limit what he can say. You don't want to have an opposition leader in a particular environment where then they're limited for what they can go on and talk about in public and criticize the government on. From Elizabeth May's press conference yesterday, she said she had to coordinate statements with the PCO. That's not something that I think we really want to put our leaders in the position of doing, and coordinating with the PMO, with the bureaucratic branch of government, trying to wash over what they're saying.
With PMO, if it's PCO, it's related to national security, and I will give Mr. Singh credit for not answering the things he can't, but I think he danced around the few things. The big difference between Elizabeth May and Jagmeet Singh is Elizabeth May has, with all due respect, no reasonable chance, not a hope in hell, of being the next prime minister. Jagmeet Singh has a particular axe to grind. He thinks he can pick off Poilievre. He thinks he can, tar Mr. Trudeau going forward with this. So he has a motivation for a selective interpretation of what he's seeing. Elizabeth May can be a bit more nuts and boltsy about things. They're both lawyers. I think they have legal and ethical standards they have to adhere to as lawyers as well. So I'm inclined to go with Ms. May's version of things.
Anne?
I think this has got to be a really uncomfortable position for many Conservatives right now, because I think that it's very hard to sustain this position. It is completely irresponsible, and as Jagmeet Singh said, disqualifying for somebody who wants to be the leader and who wants to be prime minister to refuse to get the information that would allow him to deal with any issues that exist within his party. And it is quite clearly putting yourself and your party ahead of the country. And I think that is really, it is disqualifying.
Yeah, well, he says that, the Conservative leader. Jagmeet Singh also said that Trudeau has essentially not taken responsibility here and has not acted quickly enough. It's something that we heard from the media reports when the year began. It's something that hurt the Liberal Party, the Liberal government, as the year began. Does this conclusion threaten to hurt the government even more, Susan?
I don't think so. I think what the government is saying is it's up to RCMP, law enforcement, and CSIS to follow up on the things that need to be followed up with. I don't think we want to create a scenario like in a Trump previous U.S., where he was trying to influence what was going on in the judicial process or meddling in the Justice Department. That's not how we operate in Canada. If there are things where the law has been broken, that's up to our law enforcement people to do that. That's what Canadians trust in our legal process. So I think the Prime Minister is taking the right approach. People would be screaming if there was any perception of Canadian political interference in the foreign political interference accusations if there's something that crosses the legal line.
Okay. Jordan?
Yeah, no, look, there is a process established. And to be fair, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were the ones that pushed for this inquiry. Again, what I was saying before, when government was trying to sweep it under the rug. So let's give them some credit there with that and actually, going through these steps. So I think, the proper part is now not have all the party leaders just come out and read the report and come out and give their own interpretation of it. Let's actually let the experts do the work. Let's let the Justice Hogue inquiry go through, look at it, call witnesses, call whoever they need to, and come to those conclusions appropriately. And this has to happen before the next election, because right now there is a bit of a cloud hanging over people's heads, and it's because of the government response. So we have to clear the air so that Canadians do have trust in the system going forward.
Anne,
I will point out that the NDP, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP were calling for a public inquiry from the very beginning, and as a matter of fact said that David Johnston should step down when it became clear that he had such close ties to the Trudeau family and the Liberal government, and called immediately for a public inquiry and pushed very hard for it. But I do think that there is enough that we know. I think that action should be taken, and I think that's the problem. So, for instance, there's a whole section in the public report about the nomination that happened in Don Valley North, and it doesn't appear that there has been anything progressing on that. So I agree that there needs to be investigation and potentially prosecution and all of those kinds of things. But generally speaking, when it becomes known that there's an issue, this or other issues, you ask people to step aside and while their name is either cleared or something happens with it. And if there are other people in the Liberal MPs that are involved in this, they should be asked to step aside. Same with the Conservatives.
Even Dick Fadden, who's the former CSIS director, has said names should not be named because intelligence can be wrong and there needs to be a proper investigation. I would want a proper investigation to take place. If there are firm conclusions, then people should step aside. But if the immediate, partial or temporary stepping aside of something like that immediately tars and feathers people to a point they can never recover from, even if their names have been cleared. So I think if law enforcement is doing its job, I trust that our law enforcement is doing its job, that they've seen what they need to see in this report, and that we're protecting, from a national security perspective, our methods and tactics for tracking these things. The minute you start outing this stuff, you shut down any opportunity to continue to track it. So I think we have to do something about it, but we need to do something responsibly that doesn't jeopardize our national security, does not smear people's reputations if in the end something is unfounded, and we get to a responsible Canadian path for dealing with this.
Is that a finding of facts through the Hogue Commission, though?
Well, it could be, but the thing with the Hogue Commission is, if things are under national security, you're not going to be able to hear it all anyway. If there is a list of MPs that Jagmeet is sort of suggesting, but Elizabeth May is saying there isn't, the commissioner is not going to read out or publish that list of names. That jeopardizes national security. That is without a proper RCMP investigation. If after an investigation people's names need to be named, hurry up. Name it. Do the investigation, get it done properly, name those names. But let's follow due process. It's Canada.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. But look, let's get it on with quickly. Instead of just arguing who's reading the report, who's going to get the clearance, let's get it into the proper hands so they can review it. And then RCMP will lay charges. If it is, as Mr. Singh said this afternoon, traitorous behavior by certain MPs, make sure the RCMP has it, and they'll make the determination whether to lay the charges. I think that is an appropriate path to go here. But it has to happen quickly, and it has to happen before the next election. It's been way too slow so far, so we just have to ramp up this process with the Hogue inquiry.
I think right now, too, there is a cloud of suspicion, and it is particularly, I think, on certain, definitely, I think a lot of racialized Canadians feel that, and I bet that that's the same case in the House of Commons, right? I think that there are, and we know from testimony at the Hogue Commission and other things that many Chinese Canadians, Asian Canadians, South Asian Canadians do feel that. They feel not only the suspicion, but they also feel the actual direct impacts of foreign interference, threats to their families back home, even to the point of the allegation that the Indian government was involved in killing a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil.
Okay, well, story far from over, another chapter, but really appreciate the time that I've had with three of you. Susan, Jordan, and Anne, thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. The Treasury Board President, Anita Anand, announced plans today to expand early retirement for frontline workers. Anand says the government will introduce legislation in the fall. It would allow federal public service employees, including border officers, paramedics, and firefighters, to retire after 25 years of service.
These proposed changes will provide consistency to how the pension plan recognizes the demanding nature of day-to-day duties for these occupational groups who have an absolutely critical role in promoting and protecting the safety and security of the population of our country.
PSAC President Sharon D'Souza celebrated the news in a statement saying, quote, "After years of being treated like second-class workers, this legislation will offer a dignified retirement to thousands of frontline workers." This morning, Defense Minister Bill Blair announced Canada will be sending more military aid to Ukraine. Canada will send 2,300 rocket motors, 29 remote weapon systems, and 130,000 rounds of surplus small arms ammunition. Minister Blair also announced 4 Canadian-made ambulance vehicles are on their way to Ukrainian forces. Blair making that announcement while in Belgium for a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. NDP MP Nikki Ashton held a press conference in Ottawa this morning. Ashton calling on the government to investigate charities who are allegedly funneling donations to support Israeli military operations. But reporters were more interested in asking the Manitoba MP about her travel expenses. A CBC report revealing Ashton billed taxpayers over $17,000 for a trip to Quebec City with her family during the holiday break in 2022. Ashton defended the trip, saying she met with stakeholders in her capacity as the NDP critic on official languages.
Well, first of all, I want to be clear. The House of Commons has very clear rules around MP travel, and the House of Commons also very much recognizes the work of MPs involves their critic areas, not just their constituencies, but also their critic areas, and that work involves travel, meeting with stakeholders, engaging with stakeholders that are connected to both our constituencies and our critic area.
But when asked to name the people with whom she met, Ashton would not say. And finally, NDP MP Laurel Collins has introduced a bill aiming to make it easier to qualify for disability benefits.
So what it would be is if you qualify for a provincial program, so you've gone through that process, you've gone to the doctor, you've filled out the form, you've gotten acceptance from your provincial program, it means that you do not have to go through any of those steps for the federal government. You're automatically eligible. So we've heard from so many people in my community, but also in communities across Canada, that those added steps are barriers.
The bill would cover a number of federal programs to support people with disabilities. They include the Disability Tax Credit and the Canada Disability Benefit, a program just announced by the Trudeau Liberals in the last federal budget. But that has been widely criticized by disability advocates for giving too little. Well, to the G7 summit in southern Italy now. This is where the world's top industrial and democratic countries are gathering this week, addressing a number of issues that include the conflict in Gaza, climate change, and artificial intelligence. But on this, the first day of this year's gathering, it was Ukraine that took center stage, and a $50 billion loan from the G7 countries. Money that is backed by Russian assets seized by the Western partners as punishment for the Kremlin's illegal invasion of Ukraine.
For many, many years, we've been talking about the need to go after some of the Russian assets and the Russian profits particularly, and the fact that we came to a consensus today on $50 billion worth of direct support for Ukraine, that the G7 and allies are going to be backstopping Canada is actually the first country to announce $5 billion of that will be a Canadian contribution, because we know how important it is to make sure you have the tools to continue to defend not just your country, but all of our democracies and the principles of the rules-based order.
Of course, you are right about the assets. This question was on the table from the very beginning of the war, but you've been the first country who began to move it. Thank you for your loud voice. And for today, we are very close for this decision about 50 billion. They will help. They will help Ukraine not only on the battlefield, also in reconstruction. Thank you so much.
Well, to talk about the G7, we're now joined by John Kirton. He's a professor at the University of Toronto, also the director of the G7 Research Group. John Kirton, thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, good to be with you and your viewers.
So, of course, Canada is there in southern Italy, along with other Western leaders. Can you talk to us about the goals as Canada sees it this time around as the G7 meets?
Well, Justin Trudeau came into this summit with 5 clear goals, which he outlined in his article in the Summit Background book. The first was to lead on the clean energy transition, which of course covers both climate change and energy security, a key priority here at Apulia. The second was combating misinformation and disinformation, which includes election interference, which is of course a top-line current preoccupation of those in Parliament, on Parliament Hill, and indeed Canadians across the land. He also included artificial intelligence, which is another priority here at Apulia. Pope Francis is coming in to lead the discussion on that tomorrow. But it was Justin Trudeau who really invented the global governance of artificial intelligence when he hosted the Charlevoix G7 summit back in 2018. So he's been a leader on that one for some time. The final one, understandably, is to use the Apulia summit to set up the building blocks on what his priorities will be for the summit that Canada, and he assumes he, will host next year in 2025.
That's right, and it will be Canada hosting it. Whether or not there's an election before that is something we're going to have to watch and see. But you know, those are the goals that Canada has set. But already, as this summit takes off, we know that one accomplishment has to do with Ukraine, because the G7 leaders have agreed to extend this $50 billion loan to Ukraine, backed by the interest that is raised from seized Russian assets. Without a doubt, a significant deal for Ukraine. But how important is that deal for the G7?
Oh, I think it's fundamentally important because I think everyone knows, from Mr. Putin in the Kremlin to President Zelensky of Ukraine, who led off the G7 discussions amongst the leaders here today, that unless the G7 can get its act together and support Ukraine and sanction Russia in ways that win the war for Ukraine in the democratic world, there's really nowhere else to go. Not the UN Security Council, not the G20. So they are the frontline global governance group, and they sure hit a home run today with the $50 billion deal. What was, I think, important about it was not just that they reached the biggest figure, 50 billion, but it came not just from a loan against future interest on the Russian assets that were seized from the EU or the US. That was the debate up until a few days ago. It came from all of the G7 members, and Canada was the first to announce publicly how much it would provide. 5 billion of the 50 billion, that's 10%, even though Canada's share of the G7 economy is only about half of that. So Canada's doing twice as much as its fair share. Yet again, it's really leading the G7 on Ukraine.
Yeah, so something to note in terms of the contribution Canada's making in terms of commitment. I also want to talk about the dynamics of this gathering, because of course the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, she's hosting the G7. Arguably, she is the only G7 leader who comes into the summit with a position of strength. She's the leader of a far-right party. The far-right parties did well in the recent European elections. How will that affect discussions around the table when many of the other G7 leaders are, like Justin Trudeau, on shakier ground?
It does matter, and in some cases it'll be a constraint on a few issues. But all the leaders know, as the polls come in the United States, that actually Joe Biden is back. Ever since his opponent became a convicted felon, Trump has been declining in the polls. Biden has been rising. He's now got a plurality in most of the ones that count. And with the latest figures on the inflation rate in the United States, 0 in May, if indeed it is, to quote an American pundit, the economy's stupid. That's now Biden who's really delivering the goods on that. Some of the other leaders, Macron will certainly be there, however, as legislative elections go. And if the G7 loses Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, when they go to the polls on July 4th, well, they'll get Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, who actually is more supportive of many of the G7 priorities here than Rishi Sunak was. So it's not a one-way street. And even if they think, as they've had to, oh my goodness, it might be a Donald Trump after the inauguration of the US president next January, they're trying to do deals here that will be Trump-proof. And we certainly saw that in the $50 billion package, all of which is designed to be delivered to Ukraine, the money, by the end of this year, before the inauguration. And we've also seen it in another big advance, the bilateral security agreement between Biden and Zelensky, an agreement designed to last 10 years and done in ways that makes it as politically bulletproof within the USA and its Congress as one can do these days.
Well, certainly a lot to watch as the G7 meets. John Kirton, thank you for this. Appreciate the insight tonight.
Okay, glad to be with you.
John Kirton from the University of Toronto. And that is our program for this Thursday. For everyone here at CPAC, I'm Michael Serapio. Thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.